So what was the talk? I gave a title to you, I think.
Back up and start.
Yes, back up and start. So conventionally we might say, well, start where you are. I think that's what Pema says in here. Start where you are, but I don't really know where we are, so it's kind of hard to do that. But if you back up, then you get some kind of position. You get some kind of understanding. This isn't meant to be fruition. This is meant to be path. If ground, path, and fruition. Ground is we're not happy. If you were ever happy, you wouldn't be here. You'd be somewhere, as I've said before, being happy. But so we're here. So there's some kind of distress is going on. Some kind of something's out of whack or out of adjustment, and there's some kind of abrasiveness happens in all the six sense fields, and particularly the mind, the consciousness part that feels like somebody who's feeling, some smelling, tasting, touching, some identity who's doing all of that. So by saying back up and start, it's like it has that metaphor works a little bit with sitting meditation, because when you're doing sitting meditation, you're kind of backing out of your what would be conventionally your everyday life of doing this, doing that, going here, going there, fixing food, going to work. You're kind of backing out of that. You're backing up, and you're sitting down, and then you're starting again. It's just a fresh start. Suzuki Roshi called it in the 1960s, beginner's mind. So you're backing up, and it's a beginner's mind. You're starting all over again. You're restarting. It's like rebooting something. It's something that is in a relative sense is new. And the only kind of newness is actually relative. The other day I gave a talk on where I used the metaphor of you want peace in the world, you need to have peace in the nations. Peace in the nations, you need peace in the cities. Peace in the cities, you need peace in the neighborhoods. Peace in the neighborhoods, you need peace in the home. Peace in the home, you need peace in the heart. So rather than starting in the neighborhoods, not that you couldn't do that, rather than starting in the nations, not that you couldn't do that in some way, even in the world, maybe if you can get enough attention or something into your ideas and so on. The issue with those is that they're actually functioning with an uninspected basis. And that uninspected basis is belief that there is someone solid, and believe that there's someone else that's solid. And attribution. I'm doing good, I'm doing bad, I don't know what I'm doing. They're doing good, they're doing bad, I don't know what they're doing. Simplicity, but it's not necessarily fine-tuned, but it's a way of looking at it. And you can start with yourself. You can back up and start right here. You can sit down, and whatever. The downside, I know the downside is difficult. You sit down and you say, I got to work with this. Whatever issue may be coming up, either in your life that triggers things that are down here, or things that are down here that tends to trigger other things out in your life. It goes back and forth, sometimes called warfare. It's rarely called peace fair, if ever. But you can't really make peace. There really is no such thing as making peace. There's just war. Unless there's no war, in which case there is it peace? Look closely and see if that's what it is. If you have peace, you're going to have war. So that's the way that polarity works. So it could be looked at with you in your own mind, in your own, it doesn't have to even extend into your home, your family. It can be right in your own heart or right in your own mind. Here's the paranoia, here's the hope and fear, and here's the compassion, consideration, love, understanding. There's no warfare here. There's no peace. There's no peace there here. There's no war and peace happens in the polarity areas, and the polarity areas are necessary. You have to be able to reach for something, You have to be able to push something away. You have to be able to bring something to you. You can't have a relative situation without all of that. Chop wood, carry water. Chop wood, carry water. Chop water, carry wood, which is more fun to say. So how is it done? Feels like not doing anything. The ego mind, the self-centered mind, will even say to you, this is not working. I don't really like to meditate. How about you guys? You like to meditate? Anyone here like to meditate? Must be somebody. You like to meditate?
Sometimes.
Liar. And sure, there's a feeling that can happen there that if you meditate enough, well, the very first time you meditate, you might have some thrills and spills there. But then after a while, it gets kind of bad. And then it kind of, if you keep doing it anyway, then it kind of levels out and you kind of feel like, this is not so bad. When I just hold really still and don't do anything, not much happens. It takes a while. And that isn't necessarily a goal, because if we start to talk about the goal orientation, then we're not respectful to each person's individual karma, each person's individual causes and conditions and hopes and fears and the things that are hidden in the dark areas that get triggered by things out here. Going on out here triggers something that was hidden that we don't know about, and that comes rushing out, and then it's mistaken for the truth. Something you have to act on, or acting out of your feelings is quite often just confusing to do that. But it's if you don't know what else to do, then we can get confused and we can begin to get revenge or blame ourselves or blame someone else. It's just an endless circle of confusion. So back up. Even I sometimes have said in the past, back up a quarter of an inch. And it's kind of the same thing, just whatever you're doing, whatever you're saying, smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, thinking, whatever you're doing, just back up a little bit. Let the phenomena do whatever it wants to do. All of it. All the objects, all the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the feelings, the thoughts, the sights. Back up a little bit. Actually find that there actually is a quality of awareness that is not necessarily glued to the sense fields. It's also not separate from those. But I think it's a good idea to back up a little bit and get a little bit of space around all of that. How it feels, how it smells, how it tastes, how it thinks. Just the space around thoughts is just an amazing thing to stumble into. So if you're feeling stressed or having difficulty with some particular thing, that probably has 3 or 4 stories wandering around it every time it starts to fall over or collapse, the worry I'm talking about, the stories come in and say, oh, no, you've got to take care of this. You better be thinking about this. What if this gets worse? It's, you can almost see in your mind somebody or something like, but you can't just forget about it. Sound familiar? A little tiny parent. Or some kind of dudette. So, of course, I'm saying what I'm always saying, and every talk, if you come to many of these talks, you see I'm saying the same thing over and over. I'm trying to figure out different ways to talk about what is this and what do we do with it, and how do we work? How do we develop or support or strengthen or prioritize that aspect of our whole matrix we call a conscious being, with all of the 6 sense fields and all of the perceptions that seem to extend beyond just the thinking process, if you've been there. What do we do with that? We prioritize it so that what arises in the mind, the thoughts, the feelings, the smells, the sounds, the thoughts, the feelings, Even the feelings, how do you do that with feelings? Feelings are pretty intense. Feelings may have the thought may have long ago wandered off and taken a nap, and you still have this intense slug in your gut, or might feel like it's in your heart. Maybe it is. Maybe it's wandering up. It's going to get some more space here. There is space here. There's not much here. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, make friends with yourself. Find out who you are, make friends with who you are. This is so important to actually discover this here, and the paranoia here, and the hope and fear, and all of the wanderings around that go around and feel like they shouldn't be there, and they're painful, and they're worrisome. It seems to be necessary to not fight with that anymore. And the only way you can do that is to go and look at it completely. And as it says in Tisha's 7 Points of Mind Training, one of the slogans in there, relax your attitude, or change your attitude and relax as it is. That's not Jen Gun Konko's translation. That's Trungpa Rinpoche's. But relax your attitude, change your attitude. Is that right? Change your attitude. First you got to find the attitude, and then just change it. If you're not doing sitting meditation, you won't understand what that is. You won't find any handles or levers, because there are none. But what there is your awareness, and your awareness that is grasping on some aspect of your mind, is clinging onto something and hooking into something. And there's stories going around saying, I don't like this, this shouldn't happen, I've got to get control of this, they need to stop this, I need to start that, I should, they should, I shouldn't, they need to. It's just a constant jibber jabber, yes.
So if there isn't any levers, then is it pointless to try to see what's behind the thought process?
No. As long as there's a lot of sitting, if there's a lot of just sitting, just formless meditation, there's a lot of that happening. And I'm saying this, it varies, but it seems like it's very necessary to sit up. You've seen what that's like to sit here for over a month now, I guess it's been. You don't get a bunch of answers, you get a lot of space. But the space actually allows you to see this is just a relative metaphor, but kind of the mechanics of how that situation works, of how there's some kind of grasping or clinging or hooking into or solidifying of whatever arises. And it has, we could tell stories about it. Well, it has to do with somehow wanting to perpetuate the one who is feeling that way. It's called ego. Go ahead.
So sometimes, when there's a certain thought pattern swimming around in my mind, it'll go away, and let's say it was bothering me, and then I'll say, oh, it's gone, and then it's back again. So what is that?
Well, you just said it's gone, then it's back again. The gone and then the back again, is that a problem?
Oh, no.
Okay, so if it's gone and it's back again, that's just awareness. But when we add on to it, it should have been stayed gone, and it shouldn't be coming back. So that's what we add on, and it's very subtle. It's very hard to see that. The conventional person out in the world is you sitting here, you may not feel like you're particularly enlightened, but go talk to somebody who doesn't meditate. You'll see right away something's happened, something that I understand, not a credential. I understand something about the world, or about human beings, or about living, or about just a conversation with people, that this person, because they don't have a practice, that they're doing something else with it. There's something happening with them. Have you noticed that? Just a little bit? Doesn't mean that a meditator is going to be way ahead of someone else necessarily, but usually there's more of a tendency to give the situation the benefit of the doubt. You're not quite so sure. Ego doesn't like that. Ego likes opinions, ideas, and you'll see when you talk with somebody that has, what do you think about this. Well, I don't know about that. Well, what do you think? I don't know either. I'm thinking this and that. Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm thinking the same thing. You know, whether it's about politics or whether it's about animal husbandry. Didn't think I was going to go there. I don't either. I don't really think. I'm not saying I don't have thoughts come and go, but no one's thinking them. I don't know how else to say it to you other than that. That fighting with your thoughts, your ideas, and your emotions it perpetuates it. So please stop it. Whatever arises, no more. Lose it. The feeling of the ego needs to be I think, kind of like losing the war, so that when you do, you see you're still there. Something is still there. Someone is still there.
How do you stop it?
Pardon me?
How do you stop it?
Stop what?
The war.
I didn't say stop the war. I said lose it. In other words, lose the war. And the way you lose it is you see the way you keep resisting it. You actually see the way that you don't want that. And you're going to push on it. You're going to stop it or push on it or get rid of it or chop it up or be against it. And that can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be anything more than, I'll give you probably one of the simplest ones. Here I go again. Don't do that. No comment. And that's when the actual identity part of the awareness starts to wrinkle, and its container starts to become transparent or starts to become porous, just to use those metaphors. But and then sometimes the only thing that can seal those up is fixation. And sometimes that fixation can be done with drugs. If you go to a druggist, shall we call them, you go to someone who dispenses, whatever their credential is, they're probably going to give you a drug that covers things up. I'm not saying there aren't some drugs that seem to operate somewhere near some kind of a relative source. Yes, sir.
Do we have to spend up all of our ammunition before we can lose the war?
Yeah, you may have to shoot it up a little bit, but it's always about awareness. It's never about what's happening in the awareness. We have to look to understand awareness. We have to see what is happening, see the resistance, see the pushing and the kind of the paranoia that comes up. We have to see that. Michael.
You say stop thinking. Is
I didn't
thinking?
say that.
Don't think, you said.
I said don't think?
Yeah.
I might have said that. I don't know. I don't remember saying that. Did I say that?
You said, I don't think.
I said, yeah. I didn't tell you to do that.
No.
You're not that great yet. What I said is there's no one really thinking. But the way that happens is not by stopping thinking, not by stopping anything, stopping a war. It gets worse and worse and worse. I'm sorry, my friends. I don't mean to be negative or pessimistic. When you understand what I'm saying, you'll see this is not pessimism. This is the truth. And it's not the truth to people who don't believe it. I'm saying, as far as I can from the life that I've lived so far, it seems to be necessary to be completely genuine. This means you may have to cave in to the suffering that you've been fighting with or suffering with or pushing on or pulling on or trying to cover up. When you do that, then you see there isn't anyone. As long as there's any kind of tension, there's some kind of a tensioner being tense, someone being tense. So when I say not particularly thinking, the thinking is totally doesn't function out of hope and fear. So I may think about like I did today. I think I've had too much ice cream. That's thinking. Maybe I should have thought about that before I ordered so much. Or not. Yes.
Is thinking just adding all the time?
Yeah, you could actually use that as a particular way of talking about it. You could say a particular metaphor that it's some kind of a math metaphor. Adding, subtracting, adding on to evaluating is adding, and it might amount to subtracting or judging or taking the inherent value, the imputed value away from that. Well, that's no good. Well, that's not going to work. Even if this is what's so amazing and why it's so difficult for the ego mind to really be somebody and accomplish something, because it's caught up in relative truth. And the thing about relative truth is it's relative. It's only relatively true. It's true up to a point, but fundamentally it's not true. And who you actually are is not separate from the Buddha, the awakened one. You're living, as has been said way before I got here, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. The physical experience comes and goes. You're here for 50, 60 years or more. And then this all just goes back into the elements. I mean, there may be all kinds of stories about who you were and what you did, and your family would, well, I don't need to go into that, but there's a short duration there. But while we're here, the Buddha discovered something when he was pretty young, and he passed it on to other people. Those people thought, who knows what they thought? They probably thought, oh my God, wait a minute, there's no God. Is there a God? Buddha, is there a God? What did he say? He didn't say anything. He probably had a weird look on his face, though, I would say. Like, that. Yes.
Mariah from Texas has a question.
I know her.
It's two parts.
Mariah from Texas.
She says, or asks, is changing your attitude a process of changing your thoughts? Or what's the best way to attempt to change your attitude?
So, Mariah, the very best thing you can do, my understanding of this is part of a long series of teachings that some are worked pretty well and some are a little bit difficult to work culturally. It's basically about seeing what your attitude is. And the only way that I know of to really see that is to do a lot of sitting meditation, hold still, sit down, be very symmetrical, hold still, even if it's for only 10 minutes at a time. And then if you need to move, then get up, stretch, go to the bathroom, get a cup of tea or coffee or something, come back, sit down. So be very, very something about that stillness, even though it's only partial because the diaphragm's still moving, heart's still beating, tinnitus is still rattling in the ear, people are still writing. Is that correct? Is it tinnitus? Depends on who is in the room. And so all kinds of things are, and when you try to sit very, very still, at first it seems pretty still and pretty silent. Then after a while you realize that there's all kinds of things happening. And the interesting thing about that, and the somewhat magical but fundamentally helpful thing about that, is you're really looking, after a while, you're looking at the very basis of the way things start out. That's why I say back up and start. Back up and start. Because if you back up, you back up and you back up, eventually it's like backing up into a garage. Eventually you're going to hit the back of the garage. That doesn't work very well. Let's see. What would be for a meditator? Well, yeah. Back up into a garage. Back up and back up. I think what is valuable about that is we actually begin to understand for ourselves in some kind of very intimate way that's very hard to be able to write a book about it particularly, but some kind of intimate way where we see the way things arise. We actually, I don't know if you'd call it a thought, but we see the way things start up, the actual anger or the sad feeling or the angry feeling or the anxiety. We see the way it starts up, and that's where I would say that you can change your attitude. It's like there's this intense feeling or position that we have about our life, our thoughts about where we're at, what we're doing, who we are, what's going on, and because we sit down and hold still and let the whole box of confetti fall down, We just hold still. We actually see it, and we actually see where the attitude starts at. And I don't think there's a hand that reaches in there. I don't think there's any kind of mechanism that does it. You realize that your awareness belongs to no one. There's no you that belongs to, and even though you see the causes and conditions, the sights, the sounds, the smells, all coming and going, you realize that you are free. I don't know how else to say it. And to do it as a practice, I would say the way to do it as a practice, if that particular teaching resonates with you, which some people it really does, certainly has with me, start out by sitting down and looking at your attitude. Look, when you sit down, watch the attitude go from maybe some kind of excitement about sitting, which can happen once in a while, and some kind of a sadness about it, or some kind of just remorse about all the hours you've spent looking at the wall and nothing's occurred that's been helpful. And you ask your teacher, and your teacher says, go back and sit some more. Keep sitting. It's like, you're going down a dark tunnel, it's getting darker and darker. Your candle's flickering because there's bats flying around it, flapping at it. And you pick up your cell phone and you call your teacher, or you text your teacher, or you call him on WhatsApp so you can see him. Candle, see a candle. Really in this dark tunnel. What does the teacher say? Keep going. I mean, you have to say that, because if you say anything else, you start to turn around. You start to go away from the very thing you need to look at. And there are some questions.
You're done.
So there are some things, techniques. The tantric Buddhism, the creation completion practices, the visualization, visualizing the chakras and the deities and the chakras, and doing the various mudras and so on, and counting beads. Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. And I'm not mocking any of that at all. I'm saying that may be something that you could do, might want to do. The way it looks to me, having done some of that, quite a bit of that, is I think the thing that's been the most helpful, as far as I can tell, it's hard to see causes and conditions when looking in the rearview mirror. It's just this. If you can just see that it's just this. There's teachings everywhere. Dzogchen teachings, the great perfection. Mahamudra, the great gesture. Maha, great. Mudra, gesture. It could be this one. Could be this one. You know about that one? Not me either. I just made it up. Questions?
You said to sit down and look at your attitude. How can you look at your attitude without having an opinion about what that attitude is?
It might start out with opinions. Don't get rid of something that is actually a dharma gate. I might say, don't have opinions, but I'm also saying we have to look and see that you have kind of one of the opinions that you have built in that might take the rest of your life to see through, or see that is untrue, is the belief that there is someone. If you have fear, you'll notice there's someone who's afraid. If you have happiness, there's someone who's happy. If you have jealousy, there's somebody who's jealous. If you have pride, there's someone who's puffed up. Especially feel the pride if you're kind of slightly puffed and somebody comes along and goes. They don't have to come out and say, I think you're worthless, you're a complete failure. But they might be critical of something you did or said, something. More? Something else?
You said change your attitude.
That's what Atisha said. I'm just repeating it.
So in the midst of something that's persistent,
Yes.
is there anything to train so it can just kind of give it a poke to remind us to let go?
It could be, but you could do that without me suggesting it. Anyone could do that, but it needs to come out of the awareness. You need to have spent I'm not saying there isn't another way where you don't have to meditate, but it looks like you need to sit down and hold still, and call it milkweed. Milkweed just sits there and it waits for what kind of butterflies it waits for? Monarch. They're just sitting. And through that apparent stillness, silence, when I say things, the phenomena of the mind start to move in different ways, and just witnessing that without doing anything with it strengthens that part of the mind that apprehends or sees or allows or hosts whatever is arising. And when that is emphasized, then what arises is seen in its purity. And what is that purity? You know what it is? Not separate from anything. And this is where the great perfection teachings like that, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Shikantaza, they arise out of that kind of understanding. Trust in the heart. Further questions? Michael?
Are most of our attitudes dualistic?
Yeah, can't have an attitude. If there's no dualism happening, then there's no particular attitude, if I'm understanding what your question is. Someone that has an attitude about something, at least that's the way I'm using it. Anyone else have another idea about it? Anyone have an attitude with nobody there? No attitudinal? Attituder? Attituder. Are you the attituder?
Most of the time.
Most of the time. Yes, what's your question?
What is the attitude of one who is no longer functioning out of a self and other?
I think it could happen where, depending on the causes and conditions that arise, that person is still relating to, because they're still living, still eating and sleeping and breathing oxygen and relating to whatever's around. So it could show up lots of different ways, but probably not a lot, not much. If they've used, I'm going to use this in the merchandising kind of way, because it's something like that. Someone is using that to prioritize they're turning their life over to the service of others. Then their attitude might be what's the best way to help others? You have to really meet people where they're at. This means you have to meet people in their confusion without stepping back and being the person who's not confused. You have to be confused with them. You have to be their confusion. You can't be the psychiatrist, therapist, whatever, who stands and is the person who has all this sanity, helping the poor person who's spinning in circles. And don't misunderstand, I'm not saying there aren't therapists and all kinds of psychologists and psychiatrists who are helping people and who are endeavoring to meet people where they're at. And I think it's probably especially true if people have an awareness practice where they're really working with their own identity and with their own tendency to work with gain and loss and so on, and with being right and being wrong. And so I think the attitude would. I don't know. Can you ask another question about it, or a further question?
I was just wondering about, you had said that an attitude by its very nature is kind of dualistic, and I was just curious about the attitudes that continue to function while one's not buying into the dualism.
Mm-hmm. So one who has realized is not living without any polarity. It's just the polarity is seen to be not separate. So therefore, there can be very intense polarity. You and I'm sitting here. I'm the teacher. You're the student. I mean, it might change around at some point, but right now, this is the way it is. And so, so there is a duality in that. But the duality functions by way of supporting your understanding, your clarity, so that you can understand what life is about from the point of view of these teachings. So then my function would be to function in such a way as part of the polarity. And so that comes out of your projection onto me, and of my projection onto you. Projections are not gone. Excuse me, they're just seen to be not necessarily true. They're not separate. So it's and to self-centered mind, that's a little scary, because what if you lose yourself in someone else? What if you're so close to someone else that you kind of cave in? That's a difficult area. If you have more, I'd love to talk about that the rest of this hour if you have questions about it.
Projections are not necessarily true. Are they ever true?
They're relatively true. Especially they're relatively true if you actually know that it's a projection. Then it's really relatively true. Otherwise called a lie. You're lying to yourself about something. You're projecting onto it. But when you see that you're doing it, then you don't really have to do anything about it. It's like when you see that the self-centeredness, the ego, is unreal, then you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to get rid of your ego. Even transcending the ego is kind of a misunderstanding. Not to get rid of something that is unreal. Yes?
On endeavoring to meet someone where they're at or help them, you said you have to be confused with them. How is that? How is me also being confused helpful?
Yeah, so it's not separate. So when I say be confused with them, I'm saying at least don't try to be, don't give them any advice. Maybe might be a way of saying it. If you start giving advice, that means that you think you know something that they don't. So this is why I've said, and I don't want to get into in this area because this can be very touchy and people have very strong opinions about it. If you meet someone who talks about suicide, be very careful about what you say to them by way of advice. Like you just have to be careful. I can't really say don't say this, say that. I'm just saying be as close to them as you can without getting sucked into their mental fabrications, their hope and their fear, and don't abandon them into your own ideas or judgments or opinions about it. Does that help a little bit? I mean, actually be there in all of your senses, and one of the ways it will help you is look at their body posture. Don't add to it. Don't look at somebody and say, well, since they're sitting like this, add on that they're not paying attention, or they're lazy, or they have bad posture. Just register that, and then also register the color of their clothes, the sounds outside the building. Just, what am I saying? Fundamentally, just be present. You don't necessarily have to figure something out for someone. Sometimes just your presence in the room with somebody who's having a lot of difficulty is all you have to do. Even if they say, well, are you going to help me? Let you say you're going to help me. And you respond depending on who they were and what say. You might say, well, what would you like me to do? I don't know. You're the one who has all the answers. Aren't you one of those meditator people? Why don't you help me? Anybody been there? Yeah, it does happen. And in that case, you just listen. There's no defense. And then your own body language might drop slightly. And I'm not saying that as something to do to trick anybody. I'm just saying you can act just if you're really sincere about helping the person and not just promoting your own self as some kind of a helper and getting credentials for being a helper, then you might have to give up some territory there. I don't like to use that word, or the give up idea, or all that is all. Then it's something that the ego can, sneaky as the ego is, it can come in and be the one who gives up the territory. Get a little tiny credential from that we stick on the shelf and turn off the lights so nobody will see it. Yes, sir?
The only thing I found in that situation is that you kind of become a mirror.
Mm-hmm. For them?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, there might be some of that happening. Robert?
In what you talk about being with someone in your confusion, it seems to be that if you offer a genuine nature in being with that particular person, there's some type of energy or something that they can sink to that allows them to find genuineness in you, and some of their own attributes come out to see their confusion at times. It seems like how it works for me sometimes. And what you say, I don't know if that is a true representation of what you're talking about.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Genuine.
How can one work with that type of genuineness without going to the point where you're infringing on their free will to be confused?
So one thing that I would say about that is check in on your own intention around it. So don't worry too much about what you're doing with them to not interfere or not do this, but just check in on your own intention. Another way of saying it, which I can get into trouble for saying this, because then it goes into another kind of a labyrinth of, who's on first and so on. But trust yourself. You're already doing that. You're already a counselor, and I'm talking about the way you work. You're working with people yourself, so you're a counselor. So your people are coming in. It's already a setup. You're the counselor. They're the client. And you're what I presume what you're talking about there, probably. And I would say just your presence is really powerful, especially if you don't do much at all. Just your presence. And then if you need to do something, if there's lots of space there and you're sharing that space with them, in the sense that they might not think of that you're doing that, but if you're just with them, then insight can arise around that. It'll almost be like you're having someone else's thoughts. And you may. And this to someone who is having difficulty, is not particularly balanced, but is having a lot of difficulty in other ways, it can be frightening. I'm not sure it helps how to say that. You follow me a little bit? Yeah. Presence. You just be there. I often say that to Senshu. We're good. Just be present. Just be there. Sit in front. You might say something, you might not.
Kind of in that same vein, earlier you said to cave in, or I don't remember the context, but I was really curious what you meant by that.
Just lose the war, lose the whatever's coming up. Could be in the form of wanting to help someone. Lose. It's difficult to find a metaphor that works. Some of the metaphors are stretched out so far it kind of breaks down the whole things too much, like two arrows meeting in midair. It's a wonderful metaphor, but it can give you a headache if you think about it too much, unless you're Sato. She didn't get headaches. So I'm just saying it's a transcendent kind of metaphor, where lose the war is a relative. Whatever you see that is difficult, or you're up against, or you're trying to solve, just, I'm not saying push it away or run away from it. I'm just saying have a willingness for it to crumple, for it to just fall away, or to be unsuccessful. That way the space in which that is occurring becomes more apparent. Just the space in which things are happening become not only more apparent, but you realize that what is happening is not a happening. What is happening is not, there's not something actually happening. There's just space. And you're not separate from it. Who you actually are is not separate from space. It's the truth right now. Yes, sir.
You've talked about lose the war many times. And in our culture, warfare has a winner and a loser. So when you've been saying lose the war, my understanding of that was along the lines of losing and someone else winning. But today, it sounds like what you're talking about is allowing the war to go away on its own, or like misplacing the war.
I like that. Whoops, I misplaced my war.
There's not a good word in English for that.
No, there isn't, but that's, and but misplacing it is and then if you notice, and it's kind of an interesting idea, because you're actually changing your attitude there. Misplace that, and it's not exactly ignorance. People who work with passion, aggression, and ignorance and trying to sort that out and make it work for them as some kind of enlightenment engine are always looking to, am I ignoring? And quite often people say, well, if I'm doing this and this, am I ignoring? And probably not. If you ask the question, am I ignoring? You're probably not. But you're doing something that is kind of like the twin sister or something of that, or the evil twin. But yeah, it's something to that. That's kind of an interesting image. Misplaced. I misplaced my war. So it sounds to me like that's just your excuse. You just lost it. No, I misplaced it. Nobody won, nobody lost. It's just sitting on a shelf somewhere marked fuss bucket. And it's in that big, if you saw, what is it, Raiders of the Lost Ark, a huge warehouse where he's going through the warehouse. It's like it's on shelf number 4,892 million. Yes, sir.
How can we work with changing your attitude and also have a willingness to feel a terrible feeling forever?
Well, you might not be able to do the same thing at the same time. But what you were saying, have a terrible feeling forever, it's just if we notice we're having difficult feelings, to just make room for that. We have no way of knowing causes and conditions. If you think you know why you're feeling bad in a particular situation, you're probably incorrect. Not that there isn't a relative thing that triggered something and something else, but the combination of things that come together that are the support of those negative feelings. It's very, very complicated. And even if you could figure it out, you couldn't find all the off switches, because you're trying to squeeze happiness out of relative truth, out of samsara. And it can't be done. Life is suffering. The Buddha was not exaggerating. Life is very, very difficult. We all know this. We know that there's, not that there aren't times when we're feeling pretty good. There are nerve endings, but sometimes they don't feel too bad. We're feeling, but the idea of that is just when the negativity comes up, treat it as the one we use quite often as a Dharma gate. Treat it as a Dharma gate. Say to yourself, this is a Dharma gate. I want to understand, I'm a Buddhist. I've received the precepts. My intention is to be with all things, to save all beings. And I'm going to do that. Kind of some transcendental stubbornness that will help you be with that. And then another way these are all devices, and you can probably make up your own and do just as well. But one of the things that's been said is to say, as I accept this negativity, that I don't know what it is, but as I say, I'm with this, put it in my backpack, I'm going to carry this the rest of my life. Give me all the other people that are dealing with this that don't have a spiritual path, that are completely swamped by samsara and are having fights and are winning and losing, and there's blood flying everywhere. We know that's happening in different places where people are extremely twisted and confused, and the only way to work with that is to go to war. So we have the opportunity to have a big room that no war happens here unless it's happening in your gut. And we have the opportunity to actually be here. We're pretty, as they say, free and well favored, free to come here, free to leave here. And we're well favored in that we can even hear such a thing that I am endeavoring to talk about based on looking at it myself for a long time. Yes, sir.
Is one way to lose the war just to start to communicate?
If you're listening, yes. The part of communication that usually is misunderstood. Listening, receiving. Pay attention. Give your attention to everything, and then whatever shows up, whatever's moving, receive it. Any further questions? Yes.
You said to make room for that negativity. How can we make room while it's coming up?
That's kind of elbowing its way in, wouldn't you say? No. Be a good host. Say, have a seat. And if it says, you can't find a seat big enough for me, then say, well, build your own seat. Not working for you, huh? Get another teacher. Somebody else might know something I don't. I'll be able to help you. Here's the way. I think there's few people do that, go study with somebody else. I never hear back from them, so they never say, man, I never got it. Glad I got rid of you. Yes?
Can I not take your advice and just keep you as my teacher?
What do you think?
No.
That's pretty good. Yeah, you know, as you know, I mean, joking about it, but I everybody should. If I can help you, I will. But I have to have your permission. If I have your permission, I will help you as much as I can. But I'm not a teacher for everyone. So chemistry has to be there. You have to have some kind of connection. Have to have that. If you don't have it, then probably wouldn't even be here in the first place. I think if you're in this room, probably have a connection with this person. I certainly have a connection with everybody I'm looking at. Takes a while, you know. I think that's something that it's difficult to say that, to say, well, you know, I've been doing this a long time, but it's something about that, and you've been doing this for a few years. And I'd say, just keep going, keep practicing. This is a really incredible place to live in a place like this. It's just, you know, I don't know of any place you can do this without having it be a kind of a military situation. Question? Very good, thank you.
We want to get a couple shots so we can update our website. Could you
yeah.
still sit?
I can still sit. Not very long, because I get tired of sitting.
And could we have like 3 people sit here?
And Zoshi is
facing
Oh, I see what you're doing. You're doing like a studio shot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like we did.
4 people along here and 1 person on the doshi seat. Anyone would like to volunteer?
You want Roxy's in all the pictures?
We're just going to face the wall, so.
Just anybody in black. And you should have a.
Are you gonna sit?